Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Half a Life, which is episode 22 of season 4 of Star Trek The Next Generation. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation, one episode at a time. In this video, I cover the 4th season episode, Half a Life. So, Half a Life is the episode where Luoxana Troi is visiting the Enterprise when a dignitary, a scientist from another planet, a planet of isolationists, come on board, and they agree to meet with the Enterprise because their son is dying and the scientist wants to run experiments aimed at revitalizing their son. However, Luoxana Troi ingratiates herself onto him immediately, and they form a little bit of romance. And then they find that their tests are unsuccessful, as they tested on a random star that explodes, and more research is required. And Luoxana seems to think that that's perfectly fine, but Timothy, the scientist, has to explain that in his culture, when someone reaches the age of 60, they're expected to commit a ritual suicide so as not to burden the younger generations. And he is about to turn 60. And Luoxana Troi is incensed and outraged by it and tries to convince him not to go through with it. And eventually she is successful as he asks Picard for asylum. However, this creates diplomatic tensions with the aliens who send warships to attack the Enterprise if they try to leave with Timothy on board. And Timothy tries to continue his research. However, his planet refuses to accept any more data or information from him because he's refusing to go through the ritual. So his daughter comes on board and tries to convince him to go through with the ritual, and she is successful in doing so. And so, against Luoxana's wishes, he agrees to return to the planet to go through with the suicide ritual. However, Luoxana Troi decides that she wants to go with him because his loved ones are supposed to be there, and she considers he considers her a loved one, and she promises Captain Picard that she won't cause any trouble, and then she beams down with him. So, this episode was the first episode written by Peter Allen Fields. Now, Peter Allen Fields is someone I associate with being a really great writer for Star Trek, and that has a lot to do with his particular resume of the episodes that he wrote for Star Trek. So, this, as I said, this was the first episode he wrote. He has a story by and a teleplay credit. So that means he came up with the idea for the episode and wrote the script. Also, he's credited for writing Cost of Living, which... not the best episode, another Luoxana Troi episode. He has a written by credit for that. But he is also credited for writing the teleplay for The Inner Light, one of the best episodes of this show. And then over on Deep Space Nine, he has writing credits for story by and teleplay by for writing the episode Dax, which was a mediocre episode. He has a written by credit for Progress, which I personally don't care for that episode. But also teleplay by for Duet, which again is another absolutely amazing episode. And I think it makes a difference because you could say, teleplay is not different than the written by credit. It's different than the story by credit. They're just basically writing out the script. But Duet is such a well-written script. Like, the dialogue is amazing. It's part of the reason why the episode's so great. So in season 2, he has a written by credit for The Circle, decent episode. Written by credit for Necessary Evil, another decent episode. He has story and teleplay credit for Blood Oath, which is okay. He has a story by and teleplay credit for Crossover, my favorite Mirror Universe episode. He has a written by credit for the Uniform, which I didn't care that much for. And he has a story by credit for In the Pale Moonlight. And also a story by credit for The Dogs of War, which was the penultimate episode of Deep Space Nine, where Damar and his resistance movement fails, and so they have to resort to a civilian uprising instead. So, main takeaways for this. He has a credit on The Inner Light, Duet, and In the Pale Moonlight. So, I don't know, like, it's hard to say because, again, I wasn't in the writing room with him, and I don't know exactly what he brought to the table, but based on his credits, I tend to think that he's one of the better writers, and I see a theme with these episodes that he wrote. There seem to be more dramatic in a dark way, like this episode kind of is, as is Duet in the Pale Moonlight. The Inner Light's not dark, but it is definitely dramatic. But then you got episodes like Cost of Living, and oh god, what else? There was another one from DS9 that seemed out of place. But for the most part, seems like he's tends to turn out really good scripts. Now, something I heard is that he was credited as a producer for the first 2 seasons of Deep Space Nine, meaning he was on the writing staff. In fact, I watched a interview with Ira Stephen Bear recently, who stated that the writing staff for Deep Space Nine Season 1 consisted of Ira Stephen Bear and Peter Allen Fields, and that's it. They were the only 2 writers on staff. That's not to say there were only 2 who wrote scripts for Season 1. They had tons of like freelance writers, and Michael Piller was still technically the showrunner. He just wasn't involved in the day-to-day of writing scripts. So the staff was just Peter Allen Fields and Ira Stephen Bear, which usually they have like 5 or 6 people on staff. And so Peter Allen Fields was involved in pretty much all the episodes of Season 1 and 2, even though he doesn't have a written by or story by credit. This is stuff I talked about in the past, where oftentimes they have uncredited rewrites as staff writers, as producers, because they don't want to credit it because only so many writers can be credited, and they want to give the credit to the original writer who came up with the idea. So I'm sure Peter Allen Fields had his hands on a lot of the episodes of Season 1 and 2 of Deep Space Nine. And to be fair, Season 1 and 2 of Deep Space Nine isn't all that great. Now, also to be fair, though, he is credited for creating the character of Garrick. That's another fucking huge benefit for him. And yeah, and he wrote the teleplay for Duet, and he did episodes like The Circle and Crossover. So it seems like the ones he's credited for are the better episodes. So he was, I don't know if the word fired is appropriate or let go, but he was let go at the end of Season 2 to make room for several of the Next Generation writers to come to Deep Space Nine, because Next Generation was ending, and so they want to shove them on Deep Space Nine, so they had to make room for them, because at this stage I believe there was more than just the 2 writers, and so they had to make room, so they had to let some people go, and they let him go, which seems in retrospect like a huge mistake, because he seems like an awesome writer. Honestly, and again, it's hard for me to say because I wasn't in the writer's room. I didn't know what exactly he contributed. But I would say I much prefer his writing to Joe Manowski or Brennan Braga, who both went on to become prominent writers for Voyager, and part of the problem with that episode, if I'm being honest. So it feels like they should have showcased Peter Allen Fields more, especially he, as a freelancer, came back and did In the Pale Moonlight and Dogs of War, because, yeah, goddamn, he seems really good. And yeah, but another sad thing I just learned a few minutes ago that I was not aware of is that Peter Allen Fields passed away 5 years ago, 2019, at the age of 84. So not a young buck. He was born in 1935. So that means in the mid-90s, around the time Deep Space Nine was being written, he would have been 60. Yeah, 90 minus 30 is 60. So he's not a young buck. And that's why, sadly, he did live to a pretty old age, I would say. But yeah, I had no idea that he was so old, or that he had passed away. That is sad news, regardless of the fact he was really old, which is appropriate for this episode. Still sad news. Especially since he was such a great writer. So I got my eye on Peter Allen Fields, well, the episodes he wrote going forward, because it seems like he's one of the better writers and underappreciated. Like that they let him go so that Ronald D. Moore and Renee Echevarria could come on board DS9. And don't get me wrong, I love Ronald D. Moore and Renee Echevarria, and I think Deep Space Nine improved a lot by having those two come on board, but they could have kept Peter Allen Fields too. I mean, come on. Now, apparently, Michael Piller also fired Robert Hewitt Wolf, but Robert Hewitt Wolf was Ira Stephen Bear's writing partner, and they kind of were like partners, and they worked together in a lot of stuff. And so as soon as Ira Stephen Bear heard that, he went to Michael Piller and said, "You are making a huge mistake. You absolutely should not fire him." And Michael Piller's like, "Okay, well, if it's that important to you, then he can go ahead and you can keep him. He can stay on board." And so he was only technically fired for like 2 hours. But that's a story I'll get into more detail when I get to Deep Space Nine. I'm getting really off topic. So, getting to this episode specifically, this is a Luoxana Troy episode, and in my humble opinion, I'm just going to say this up front because I've said it before, and I'm not going to make a secret or beat around the bush about this. This is my favorite Luoxana Troy episode. And here's another thing that I've surely mentioned probably every single time I cover a Luoxana Troy episode, is that because I watch these reviews before I go on to do my review, and I keep hearing the opinion that that Luoxana Troy's Deep Space Nine appearance were the best, and I could not possibly disagree with that more. In fact, I think her Deep Space Nine appearances are the worst, with the exception of Manhunt from season 2, which I covered. That's clearly the worst. Well, no, the Muse is. I don't know if the Muse is the worst Luoxana Troy episode. It's the worst episode she appears in, because the Jake shit makes it even worse. But her storyline, like I've heard a lot of people say, "Oh, the Jake shit sucks, but her storyline is good." It's not good. It's sitcom bullshit. It's terrible. But I don't know if I just take her Muse storyline compared to the whole episode of Manhunt, I think Manhunt is worse. But again, that's kind of a splitting hairs. They're both fucking terrible. And then her other two Deep Space Nine appearances, people were like, "Ooh, well, those are actually good. I like them." No, they're terrible. For one, she doesn't belong on Deep Space Nine. Her daughter's not a member of the crew, so what the fuck is she doing there? And two, and this is the bigger point, and the bigger point I want to make to this episode specifically, Luoxana Troy episodes where she's fawning over men who don't reciprocate her advances are the worst. That's the worst use of her. And to my knowledge, on Next Gen, the only episode that features that prominently is Manhunt, which is her worst appearance. And they go all in on this, where to the point where she's sexually harassing all the men on the ship. And to be fair, she is a bit flirtatious with Jean-Luc in both Haven and Menage a Troi, but it's not the main feature. And she's a little flirtatious with him at the start of this episode, too. But that goes away very quickly, thank God. Which is why, this is part of the reason why it's the best Lwaxana Troi. Because, and this is why I would make the argument for Deep Space Nine appearances being the worst, along with Manhunt. Because those are the episodes that focuses on her fawning over someone that doesn't reciprocate. All 3 Deep Space Nine episodes have her fawning over Odo. And I don't give a fuck about the Turbolift scene where Odo melts in her thing and everyone's like, oh, but that's such a good scene. It's okay, but that episode still sucks. It's still terrible. Like, it's just terrible seeing her fawn over people who very clearly, I mean, she's supposed to be a fucking telepath, not even an empath, but a telepath. And these people, you don't even need empathic or telepathic powers to tell that these men are not into you. And it fucking pisses me off how she constantly is overbearing and goes, "Wah!" Now, to be fair, with this episode, she starts off that way. But here's the major difference. Timothy reciprocates. He actually is into her. And that makes all the difference in the world. In fact, that's part of the reason why I love this episode so much. Because finally, she's fawning over someone who actually returns her feelings for her. Why doesn't she do? I mean, she's an attractive, powerful woman. It's just she's not everyone's cup of tea. But I'm sure there's plenty of men, like in this episode, who would love her. Why is she always like throw herself and smother men who clearly don't feel that way about her? It is so annoying. So, yes, there were plenty of men who would reciprocate, and we finally get an episode where that happens. Now, the other episodes of TNG, like, don't really have to do with either, because Menage a Troi is about someone that it's like the reverse thing. And I didn't point this out in my review for Menage a Troi, but I didn't, because she's kind of getting her just desserts. Because in this case, someone is fawning over her where she clearly isn't into him. She's like, so she's getting her, irony, poetic justice in that case. And then there's, after this, Cost of Living, where is it again is a different situation, because it's she's agreeing to settle for this man that clearly and marrying him just because she's settling for anyone when clearly they're not the best match. And then the dark page, which has nothing to do with romance, it has to do with her trauma and repressing memories. And so that's why all those episodes are good. That's why her TNG appearances are better than the DS9. Take out Manhunt. You got Haven, where she's not... I mean, she does make some advances at Jean-Luc, but that's not the purpose of the episode. She's mainly just there to oversee Deanna's wedding and having her petty feuds, which I'm actually fine with. That's why I like that episode more than a lot of people do. So you have Haven, where she's serving as the mother of the bride. You have Menage a Troi, when this trying to rebut the advances of a disgusting Ferengi, and she's abducted. And then this episode, where she actually falls in love with someone who loves her back. And then Cost of Living, where it's about her settling for someone that's not really her cup of tea and realizing it's a mistake. And then you have Dark Page, which again has to do with trauma and repressive memories. And that's why those are the best episodes. And then once you get to Deep Space Nine, all fucking 3 of them are all about her hitting on Odo when very clearly Odo's not into her. And then Manhunt, about her like hitting on every fucking buddy when they're clearly not into her. And so that's why those are the 4 worst episodes. Now, the reason why this is the best episode isn't just because a dude finally loves her back and she's finally like hitting on someone who is receptive to her, but the use of Luoxana Troi is a lot. I think Dark Page is the only other episode that uses her in a dramatic way, and I think Dark Page is definitely the second best use of Luoxana Troi, which I'll get to a bit later. But I think this one's slightly better just because the scenario that they come up with is a very interesting, very thought-provoking, and the characterizations with her, the way that they use her in a dramatic way really works. Now, the funny thing is that I watched a bunch of reviews for this episode before coming on here, and people seemed, all the reviews I watched anyway, people were really mixed. Like, some people loved it, some people hated it. I watched, there was a couple reviewers who, like, loved it and thought it was one of the best episodes ever, and there's some other people who thought, it's not really that good, and there's some other people who absolutely hated it. And here's my stance on it. The people who didn't like this episode, the reason that I heard them give mostly was that Luoxana Troi is too crazy, silly, and over the top a character to fit for this dramatic setting. So she seemed like the wrong character to be in this episode and undermined the dramatic intentions of this episode. And this is something I actually might have agreed with a long time ago when I first saw this episode as a teenager. But lately I've actually come to turn around. And actually I think that the way they use her in this episode is actually brilliant. And I think she's like the perfect person to be in this episode because of she's so vibrant and full of life, and so it's such a great contrast when you have someone who loves life so much paired with someone whose culture tells him that he must forfeit his life, and the conflict you get from that I think is absolutely amazing. And I think if you had a different character like another guest star or like Beverly Crusher or someone like that, it wouldn't have worked, especially Beverly Crusher. That would have felt completely flat, as we'll talk about in the next episode that tries the Beverly Crusher romance. But anyway, so yeah, I think the use of Luoxana is actually brilliant here, and I think I really buy, and some people didn't buy their relationship, didn't buy that Timothy would be into Luoxana, but I totally do. Because, again, this gets to the thing I was saying before about opposites attract, and how Timothy is sort of shy and like steady, and he would appreciate someone who is invigorating, and someone who is really into him and is patient with him. And some of the scenes between them, like the romantic scenes, and again, contrasting it to the next episode, which sucked at doing romantic scenes, these ones actually work very well. And again, credit to Peter Allen Fields, apparently amazing writer, who I don't know why they didn't have write more. But yeah, because you got the scenes like when they're in 10 Forward after he failed with his experiment, so he's feeling very depressed and down. And also, he's about to die, but nobody knows this yet. And Luoxana comes to sit with him and tries to make light chit-chat. And she's obviously trying to make him feel better by lightening the mood, which clearly isn't working. So she says to him, oh, I should go. I should leave you alone, because she's starting to read the room and see that her, light humor is not being received very well. But he gently grabs her arm and says, please stay. And that is an amazing bit of a really powerful bit of romantic writing. And because it illustrates that she wasn't being annoying, because the audience and even Luoxana probably thought that she was annoying him and just making things worse. But in fact, she wasn't. He's just not in the mood to, joke around, but he still appreciates her company and still wants to have her there. And so I think that is particularly powerful, and does really work, which again, Luoxana and Troy actually takes hints, actually can read the room and tell that someone's not being that receptive, instead of just blah 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 talking over like she does with fucking Odo and like she did with Manhunt, which I can't fucking stand those episodes. But no, she comes off as a well-written, fully dynamic character. And say what you want about Cost of Living, and I'll cover that when I get to that eventually. I can tell that she was written by Peter Allen Fields again, because she was actually, her character was written well in that episode too, which is more than I can say for all her DS9 appearances and fucking Manhunt. Anyway, I'm sorry, never gonna let that one go, especially because I keep watching these videos where people keep saying, oh, her Deep Space Nine appearances were the best. They were the worst. Anyway, I'm never gonna let that go. I will die on that hill. Anyway, so I gotta talk about that scene where Luoxana and Troy's on the bridge waiting for Deanna, and she goes up to Worf and is like hounding him and is like, what does this button do, Mr. Wolf? And he's like, careful, madam, that is a photon torpedo launcher. And it is Worf, not Wolf. Because I remembered her calling him Mr. Wolf from Cost of Living. I did not at all remember that the first time she called him Mr. Wolf was in this episode. In fact, I thought that maybe she might have called him Mr. Wolf before Cost of Living, but I didn't remember any specific examples of that. But yeah, so I finally noticed, and this episode is actually the first time she called him Mr. Wolf, unless I missed an earlier example, which I don't think that I did. I think this is the first time. But I've heard some people complain about this scene, saying that she's literally acting like Dee Dee from Dexter's Laboratory, going, woo, what does this button do? It is a bit silly. And then I've heard a lot of people complaining, is like, why does she have free access of the ship? Why do they let her in places? But to be fair, later in the episode, when she is waiting for Deanna to come out of the conference room, she's actually waiting for Timothy, but on the guise of waiting for Deanna. And when Deanna's like, what did you want to see me about, mother? And she's like, huh? And it's like, you wanted to see me? She's like, yeah, of course I did. And then went over to Timothy and started flirting with him. But then Riker, to be fair, said, Mrs. Troy, you're not allowed on the bridge. I must ask you to vacate. So they don't give her necessarily free reign. And she does maybe have a bit more free reign than... I think she just ingratiates herself onto everything. But I don't have a problem with it, and I actually really like that scene with Worf. You gotta inject humor. It's the Luoxana Troy episode. It's a very serious, dire episode. I don't fault them from putting a bit of humor in where they can. You have this scene where she finds out that Timothy is meant to kill himself when he returns to the planet. And she wigs out, she freaks out. She goes to Picard, and I like this, how she goes to where Data and Riker are in the room. She doesn't care. She just blurts out and starts complaining about it, and Picard even asks, "Oh, is this true? They're going to kill themselves? They're meant to kill themselves when they turn 60?" And he asks Data this, and Data's like, "Well, we actually don't know anything about these people, so that very well may be true." And then Loxana was like, "Yeah, it is true. He told me himself." And she freaks out, and she's like yelling at Picard. It's like, "You gotta do something. You gotta stop them." Picard's like, "Well, I can't. Prime Directive." And also, not just the Prime Directive, but also the diplomatic situation. These are isolationists who, against their better judgment, made contact with outsiders in order to help them with their crisis. So the diplomatic situation is very tentative, as we'll see when he asks for the asylum, how they completely overreact. Like, their reaction's like way over the top. So I think Picard was knowing that. And also I've heard people, and this is a thing I will correct whenever it comes up, because people seem to misunderstand the Prime Directive and think that it's only for pre-warp civilizations, but it's actually not. It's for all other civilizations outside the Federation, any non-Federation world. But the difference is the pre-warp, they're not supposed to have any contact at all. They can observe, but no contact, no interference whatsoever. But more advanced cultures that they have made contact with, which are warp capable, they're still not allowed to interfere with the internal politics. And I keep bringing this up. It happens in Redemption, where they refuse to let Picard interfere with the Klingon Civil War because it's an internal conflict to Klingon. Even though Klingons have warp drive and Federation knew about them for years, it's still an internal conflict, and the Prime Directive prohibits them from interfering in other cultures' internal conflicts. Same with the Bajorans, how when the Circle was throwing a coup to take over Bajor, Starfleet said, "Prime Directive, you're not allowed to interfere because this is internal context, internal to Bajor. We cannot influence something that's an internal conflict." So it's the same deal here. That even though I don't know if they're warp capable, but they're definitely, assuming that they are, but they have these ships or whatever. But moreover, they've already made contact with Starfleet, but that's not the point. The point is it's still not, they're not allowed to go down there and tell them what to do with their fucking culture. That is blatantly violation of the Prime Directive. So I heard several people say, "Hey, this isn't a warp capable, so the Prime Directive doesn't apply." But that's misunderstanding. The Prime Directive has several uses. But anyway, So then we get the scene with Loxana, and she goes in the transporter room. And actually, at the end of this scene, when she's yelling at Picard, saying, "You have to do something," he's like, "No, I can't." And she leaves the room really pissed off. I don't know why, but I love the way this scene ends with Picard saying, "Computer, locate Counselor Troy." It may seem like an obvious or simple thing, but I actually really appreciate it. I really appreciate that Picard knows better than to not try to talk her down himself or to send a security team or war for someone. Instead, she's like, let's get her daughter on board. Not only is she her daughter, but also the ship's counselor, so the person who's most qualified to deal with her. And so that leads to the scene in the transporter room, which I think is fucking amazing. I think this is a really great scene. Again, I've heard other people complain about this, saying, "Oh, I can't take her seriously in this dramatic thing," but I totally can. I think, again, this was earned, in contrast to next week's episode, which the romance was not at all earned. This romance was very much earned with these great scenes I was talking about before. And so when you get the moment with Luoxana freaking out and crying and being hysteric and being like, he's going to die, this is unfair, and the way that Deanna talks to her is like really good. It's like she's doing her job very well for once. and sort of and I like how Luoxana's first reaction to Deanna showing up is, don't try your psychobabble BS with me, which, because she sees her as her daughter, not, and she doesn't want, she's like above, being counseled or whatever. But I think Deanna talks to her as both a daughter and a counselor. She talks to her as someone who cares about her mother, but also who has this professional training and knows how to handle a situation like this. Also, got to point out, loved how O'Brien was in the room, and when Luoxana started breaking down, Deanna just shot him a look, and he took a hint, and he was like, oh yeah, I'll just be outside cleaning the buffers or whatever. And I love how he locks the transporter. Some people are questioning why he did that, but honestly, people should fucking do that more often. Like when Geordi was fucking turned into that weird thing and was still able to operate a transporter, which is stupid, and so why didn't the guy lock the goddamn transporter then? Although I think they said that they did disable the transporter, but Geordi was able to undo that, even though he was a fucking weird lizard thing, which I totally don't fucking buy. But not just that episode, there's a lot of other episodes where they seem like they should have locked down the transporter instead of just left it open so people could come in and do whatever shit they wanted to. But so I actually appreciate O'Brien, but not that Luoxana would know how to fucking use the transporter anyway. But still, I think it was a nice touch. But yeah, that whole scene when Deanna's trying to comfort her and Luoxana's freaking out, it was really good stuff. And then all the interactions between Luoxana and Timothy were amazing. How she came to him and he's like, when she's like, you're a kind woman, and she's like, no, I'm a hateful woman because I hate you for what you're about to do. And how like difficult that was for him. But what was the straw that broke the camel's back for Timothy wasn't necessarily, I mean, I'm sure Luoxana's arguments helped him make the decision, but the main reason why he made the decision was because he realized that this planet's sun is going to go nova and destroy the planet in like 40 years, and if he dies and a new scientist takes his data and tries to continue his work, they're going to be working from behind. He guesstimates it's going to take them like 10 years to catch up to the point he's at now. So it would make perfect sense for him to want to, in order to save his world, he needs to stay alive. And he tries to make that argument, but the minister guy is, being an abstinent bureaucrat and being completely stubborn shithead and refuses to even listen, which, as I talked about before, is a trope, but it's also realistic to a lot of bureaucrats and government officials in real life, so I can't really fault that, but it is still frustrating to watch. And again, so he asked for asylum, but things just keep getting worse, and really the straw I think that broke the camel's back for him to change his mind again was the fact that they wouldn't take his work. They wouldn't take his data. They wouldn't accept his transmissions. So, and this was a very frustrating, and I think, again, the actor who played Timothy's fucking amazing. I know it's a dude from MASH. I never watched that show really, or not where I remember it, but, so I'm not familiar with this actor, but he does a very fucking good job in this episode. And it's part of the reason why it works so well. But But yeah, you see his frustration when he's trying to send this data to his world, and they won't even accept it. So he is their best hope in saving their entire planet, and they're refusing him because of their stupid fucking ritual, which is so frustrating. So, but if that wasn't enough, the scene with his daughter coming on board, and again, this is the first appearance of Michelle Forbes in Star Trek, and she's an amazing actress. I freaking love Michelle Forbes, and I think I wish she was in Star Trek more and didn't have this delusions of doing a film career that didn't actually go anywhere. But yeah, her performance here is so good that they brought her back 4 months in a row. But her hairdo looks... don't even get me started on a hairdo. What the fuck is that? But anyway... but that scene is so good. It is so powerful. And she makes an argument of like, you know, my father taught me to respect the resolutions, and how dare you come by and fucking change his mind, and then when she says to him, I'm ashamed of you, and leaves, like, that is so heartbreaking. And again, the way Timothy plays this is so powerful. Now, I think that she's being stupid because he points out, hey, our whole fucking planet is at risk, and it's more likely for everyone on the entire planet to fucking die unless I stay alive. And her response to that is, well, someone else can do your work. Your work is over. And that just shows how fucking brainwashed and closed-minded these people are. And not just her, but mainly the minister and the other people who are like refusing to accept his work. I mentioned this in another, I think in my season-long reviews when I talked about this episode, and this is a stance that I completely stand by. I think these people deserve to die. I hope that their planet went nova in 40 years because they were so fucking idiotic, too stupid and rigid with their goddamn rituals to realize that their best option... it would have been one thing if Timson, he completed his work and they were saved the sun, and that was one thing, and that crisis was over. But he was saying, oh, I don't want to go back to die because I love the Roxana, and she convinced me otherwise. Now, I would still side with him, and I would still think that's the right thing to do, but these aliens would not be so obtuse and so ridiculous in that scenario. They would be, even though I'd still very strongly disagree with them, it would still be understandable. But in a situation that's presented in the episode when their entire planet is at risk, not only was it unacceptable and just idiotic and the worst thing they could do, the way they react, I think they deserve to die because of that. I think that I hope their planet blew up. Well, no, that's unfair because there's tons of innocents on the planet, like millions of people who shouldn't suffer because of the actions of a few fucking morons at the top. But still, I think they deserve it. I don't hope that it blew up, but I'm sure that it did. And I think it's their own damn fault for reacting the way they did. They're just being idiotic and stubborn and closed-minded to such an absurd degree. They fucking deserve it. They do. But that being said, it made total sense that Timothy changed his mind again, and I love, again, this is so good, this is so well written, so well acted. Love the scene where Timothy goes into Loxana and she doesn't need to, by the way, it's been established that she can't read his species, so her telepathy doesn't work on him at all. So everything she's reading is the old-fashioned way with body language and how we human beings read people. But he walks in and she instantly knows, you're going back. And she doesn't really argue, because I think because seeing her daughter, or his daughter, and how much that affected him, I think she can sympathize, even though she still disagrees. And then this leads to one of the most emotionally powerful scenes in the whole season, where Timson goes to beam down to the planet, but Luoxana shows up and asks to go. It's like, your loved ones are supposed to be there, so I would like to be there. And I love, again, how she goes to Picard. Again, this is her being so well written and so reasonable. She goes to Picard and says, permission to beam down, permission to disembark, rather than the, usually obtuse and ridiculous and stupid way she normally acts. It's like, beam me down and blah, 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 blah. Instead, she's like the way she was acting earlier when she was yelling at O'Brien to beam her down. But here she's like, can I have your permission to go down there? I promise that I won't cause any trouble. And I believe her, and I think she's absolutely telling the truth. And I love how Picard looks to Timothy to see how he feels, and it is clear from Timothy's expression that he really wanted her to go. So Picard said, "Yes, you may go," and they hold hands, and you got to assume, because it's heavily implied, that she does go down there and is a part of the celebration of his resolution as he kills himself and celebrates his life and doesn't cause any problems. And that brought a tear to my eye. That scene, I think, is so powerful. I should have maybe mentioned this in my tearjerker countdown that I just did. I think that scene is so powerful. I did tear up from it. I think it is a very... Because how powerful is that she's... Even though she totally disagrees with what he's doing, she accepted that this is what needs to happen. So loves him so much. And you get the tragedy in this, because some people might argue, oh, they just knew each other for a couple days. But here's the thing, they did hit it off very well. And who knows? It's the tragedy of who knows how much they could have, how far their relationship could have went. I mean, maybe eventually gotten married. They could have had a really happy life together, but she'll never know, because it's cut short way too soon. And that's a tragedy. And I think that is very powerful, the way it's played in this episode. It brings a tear to my eye. So yeah, I thought this whole episode was damn good. So I would like to thank all those who support me on Patreon. It's very much appreciated. It does help me continue with my channel. Very much appreciate everyone's support, but I have to give a big special thanks to Brendan Nailhouse. Thank you so much for all of your support throughout the years. Very much appreciated. But I would also like to give a shout out to Antarius, Greg Marley, Francisco Chuck Hooks, Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky, Matty Jester, Joel Lavalles, Alessandro Miguelcio, Norman Buckwald, Stephen Kennedy, Brenton Berg, and Allison Fordyce. Thank you all so very, very much for your support. So we have a few patron comments for this episode. First comment is from Stephen Kennedy, who says, I thought I would never be debating with myself on which Luoxana episode is better than which is better, this or Dark Page. I also wondered why Majel Barrett was in so many episodes, even in DS9. What the bleeding freck? 3 of them. Then I found out why when I bought the DVDs, that she was Mrs. Star Trek. There is only one more episode with Luoxana Troi that I do like, and that is Haven. Michelle Forbes' first and best appearance in Star Trek. I'm so glad she turned down DS9 and we got Nana Visitor instead. David Ogden Stiers, who plays Timothy, was on the TV show MASH, which my dad loved. I rarely cry watching Trek episodes, and guess what? Loxana Troy is in 2 of them. I forgot the name of this race. They are idiots, so if Timothy doesn't kill himself, I agree with Trevine in the quickening for helping people to die. No one needs to suffer. They will not use his work after the age of 60. Loxana Troy is 100% right here. If this was me, I wasn't able to beam down and watch someone I care about be terminated because they're 60 years old. Let's see who wrote the best Loxana Troy episode. Ted Roberts, only episode he ever wrote, period. And Peter Allen Fields was his first episode of Star Trek that he wrote. So my rating is 10. I would have loved to see a scene with Data asking Riker or Geordi, why is Loxana Troy so upset that Timothy is accepting his fate? I didn't say Worf, as Klingons love dying, and Worf would probably say it's an honorable death to die for your people, unless it was a fight against the barrel. Out of 10. Wow, 10 out of 10. That's high praise. High praise indeed. We'll have to agree to disagree that Michelle Forbes, you're glad that she turned down DS9. Look, I have mixed feelings about that because Kira works so well. And I feel like having a Bajoran officer as Sisko's first officer adds something that wouldn't be there if you had a Starfleet officer. But that being said, I'm sorry, I take Michelle Forbes over Nana Visitor any day of the week. Not that I don't love Nana Visitor, I totally do. But Michelle Forbes is just one of the best actors in Star Trek, period. And yeah, I love Ensign Rome better than Major Kira. But that being said, I don't regret Kira being there at all. Anyway, next comment is from Norman Buchwald, who says, ironic that the best 2 Loxana episodes are truly serious ones like this one and Dark Page. It's actually quite a good episode, and in spite of the hair, even Michelle Forbes is good in it. David Ogden Stiers is excellent. I'll give it 8.5 out of 10. Not supposed to be doing 0.5s on my channel. No, I'm just kidding. Do what you like. Anyway, next comment is from Antarius, who says, it's strange how the episode starts with the classic jokes about Loxana, but then turns into maybe the most serious episode in the franchise before Deep Space Nine. The theme itself is borrowed from the novel Pebble in the Sky by Isaac Asimov that I read a long time ago. The B-plot about the dying sun contradicts basic principles of stellar evolution, which made me dislike this plot. Picard states, the Prime Directive forbids us to interfere with the social order of any planet. This would mean warp capable is not the major point of the Prime Directive. If you use this definition, the Prime Directive was broken so many times. I'm certainly pleased with the way the Prime Directive is handled. For the example in the episode Children of the Comet of Strange New Worlds. My rating is 8 out of 10. Yeah, I already talked about the Prime Directive, and it has several functions. One is the pre-warp thing, but the other is not. Now, I don't know if I would agree that it was broken so many times. You would have to point this out to me. There were a couple times I pointed out myself, like Taste of Armageddon is a fucking huge one. That is like Captain, and I believe it's after a Prime Directive was established in canon, but Captain Kirk pretty much shit all over the Prime Directive. He took the Prime Directive and like ripped it to pieces and shoved it down his throat. But anyway, but I'm sure there are other episodes of Star Trek where this is true, but I don't think it's so many. But anyway. Next comment is from Kyrie091, who says, half a life, more like laugh at strife. Huh? I don't know. I don't remember this episode. Maybe it was Good. Mark will tell me if I liked it or not. Mark, is this episode good? And by good, I mean, is it better than Voyager Endgame? Well, Kyrie091, you are setting the bar incredibly low. I mean, by that standard, practically every single episode of the Star Trek franchise is good. If the standard is it has to be better than the Voyager Endgame, that means like 99% of the episodes of the franchise are good. So that's an impossible. I mean, that's too easy of a standard. The bar is way too low there. But yes, I will answer you, Kyrie091. You do like this episode. You do think it's good. Read your mind. Anyway, thank you so much, patrons, for your comments. So my rating for Half a Life out of 10 is going to be a 9. Excellent. And I thought about this hard because I think in the past I gave this an 8. I think so. I'm not sure. Sometimes I'm wrong about what I did in the past. But I think I gave this an 8 in the past. And I was in my instinct to give it an 8 here. But I was like, I think it deserves a 9. I think it does. As much as I don't like Luoxana Troy, she's used so well here, and this is clearly her best appearance, which again, the bar is low for that, so it doesn't automatically make it a great episode. But it just so happens to be like very thought-provoking, the whole thing about being the age of 60. And the other thing I forgot to mention I really like about this episode is because I think Antarius mentioned an A and B plot. I would actually disagree that there is an A and B plot. I think the whole episode is one plot, or at least they blend. If there is an A and B plot, they blend them together so well. Because you could say there is a storyline about Luoxana and Timmonson's romance, and then there's a storyline about Timmonson trying to fix the star, but really there's one plot about Timmonson, and it follows all aspects of his life. And also his work is linked into the plot of Luoxana because it ties into why he doesn't want to do the resolutions. So the plots are so close together that I wouldn't even call it A or B. But that's just me personally. And I love that, though. I hate the rigid, let's do some nonsense anomaly bullshit while we have some boring character stories going on, which I'll be talking about in a couple episodes. In theory, we'll be talking about that then. But this definitely isn't that. It feels like a very cohesive story. That's just very powerful, brings a tear to my eye, like its emotional heights, and I think it's done so well. I think it's very well written. I'm not quite there with Stephen Kennedy, give it a 10. I think it's not quite there at 10ness, but I will give it a 9. Excellent. So that is it for my review of Half a Life. Thank you so much for checking this out. So let's see what's coming up next on my channel. Thursday will be my review for Discovery, covering the latest episode. Saturday, talking about The Host. Been hinting at a bad romance. It's funny, we get a good romance followed by a terrible romance. But anyway, that's coming Saturday. And Monday I'll be over on Patreon to do another revisited for my Patreon supporters. This time I'll be revisiting the episode The Mind's Eye. That'll be over on Patreon. And then on Wednesday, back on my main channel with a public review for, as I touched on just now, In Theory, the whole anomaly BS while we have a stupid character story going on. So that will be next Wednesday. So be sure to check out my channel you can keep up with all of that, and all of the other reviews I do on random Star Trek stuff and other shows and whatnot. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all that. And thanks a lot for watching.